Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me. We are bang on 1 o'clock, so let's get started. So first of all, a little bit of housekeeping, just so you know how these webinars are run. If first of all you can confirm that you can hear what I'm saying, that would be a great start. So you've either got a chat box, a chat option, or a Q&A option in your menu. So if you can select one of them and then just say yes, or yeah, we can hear you, yes, coming through loud and clear. That would be fantastic, and then I'll carry on. Yeah, they're coming through. Brilliant. Thanks very much for confirming. Let me just clear them off. Thank you. So, actually, most of you have answered in the Q&A section of your menu. So if you've got any questions whatsoever, put them in the Q&A section of your menu. The reason for that is it shows me each question individually, and I have to select that I've seen or answered that question before I can move on to the next question. So it helps me organize because it's just me running this webinar. I'm doing this all on my own. So if you've got questions all the way through, oh, thank you, Tanya, for letting me know that chat is disabled. That's very helpful. Yeah, so you've only got the Q&A section, so put your questions in there, and then that just helps me keep on top of them. So I might not answer them all the way through. I might read them, but I might not answer them till the end because it might be more pertinent that I leave the answer till the end. But if you can put them in there in that section, that'd be great. And otherwise, yeah, feel free to put questions in there all the way through. I might answer it there and then, or I might leave it till the end. So this is all about rent to rent, and I'm going to try and cover HMO and serviced accommodation because rent to rent is one strategy, and then the main property strategies that you can put into rent to rent are HMO or serviced accommodation. So for those of you that don't know or are a little bit unfamiliar, essentially rent to rent is where I, as somebody who wants to make money out of property, will rent a property off a landlord, and I will take that property and I will use it as a HMO or I will use it as serviced accommodation. Because let's say, for argument's sake, I have to pay that landlord £1,000 per month to rent their property from them. And what I will do with that property is convert it into the HMO or the serviced accommodation unit with the intention of making a lot more money in rental income from HMO or from serviced accommodation. So let's say that I make £3,000 a month. I pay all the bills for that property, which mean that when I've rented the property out, when I've paid all the bills, when I've paid the landlord their £1,000, means that I'm still making a margin. So out of that £3,000, I might be walking away with £700, £800, £900 per month. So I'm controlling the property. I don't own the property, but I'm still making cash flow from the property. And that's what rent to rent is. Now, for those of you that are, brand new to property, you might not have a very positive opinion of rent to rent because there's a lot of rent to rent deals that are being sold by deal sources that don't seem to be everything that they're cracked up to be when the deal is being sold. And therefore, that gives rent to rent a bad reputation in the market. Now, I've got experience of rent to rent personally because I've done both HMO and serviced accommodation with rent to rent. And I made a significant amount of money from doing so. I know people that run rent to rent as their main property strategy because they're controlling the properties that are on their own, and they make a lot of money out of it. So if you see deals out there that are for sale from deal sources, my question to you is, why are you even looking at them? It's not a difficult thing to work out what kind of rent to rent property will work, and then it's not a difficult thing to do your sums, secure the property, turn it around, and get it up and running. It is the first sort of creative property strategy that I did. So I went into rent to rent when I was absolutely brand new to creative property strategies, and I went into it with the attitude of, whatever it takes, I'm going to make this work. And that worked out really well for me. It was the start of my going into property full time. It was the start of that career, and in a short space of time, I was making £6,000. I easily replaced my monthly income, making £6,000 per month by only working 2.5 hours a week. So it's something that can significantly change your life. So without further ado, let's get on with it. So as described, we're going to concentrate on cash flow. This is the part of the cycle of property, the systemized cycle of property that we understand at Sourced that you're going to be working on, because rent to rent, it's not going to give you, equity in property. It's not going to give you capital uplift. It's just going to give you cash flow. Now, what we do is our strategy that we use with our franchisees is that we start with cash flow. And then once they've built up their cash flow, most of our franchisees then move on to looking at profit. So they'll go from something like rent to rent, and then they'll move into commercial conversions or flips or refurbishments, and the kind of property deals that make them, instead of making 800 quid a month, they make them 30, 40, 50 grand. So we start with cash flow, then we move into profit, and then we look at building a portfolio. So at that point, you're looking at, commercial conversions or ways of adding properties to your portfolio. And then when you've got to that point, you might be building new build houses. You might have reached what you think is the pinnacle of property development. But then at that point, what we find is when people get to that developer sort of level, then their focus comes back to cash flow. So cash flow is always an incredibly important part of the cycle of building up your property portfolio, your property wealth. And so rent to rent has an important part to play in all of those stages, because rent to rent can be sitting there in the background, making you £6,000 a month, even if you're building, a whole estate of new houses because you've moved on to developments and you're making, instead of 30, 40, 50,000 pounds per project, you're making £1 million per project. But to have 6, 10, 15,000 pounds being created every single month after month in the background gives you that level of security that even if that development goes completely wrong, you're still going to be okay. So rent to rent's a really important part of getting set up, but also maintaining security that you're going to be making money. We've got plenty of examples of franchisees in our network that have made a significant amount of money from rent to rent. This is just one of them. This is Shahid. So Shahid sold 22 rent to rent serviced accommodation deals within 48 hours. So he's one of those guys that has gone out there, secured a huge number of rent to rent serviced accommodation deals, and then sold them on. But unlike most other sources who will secure the deal and then just sell it on immediately, the way that he has done it is that he secures the serviced accommodation deal, then he sets up the business. So he actually gets that unit trading. So you've got a trading history that comes from that unit. And then he sold them on in groups of like 4 or 5. So he's selling on established serviced accommodation businesses based on rent to rent instead of just selling it on as a going concern. So, sorry, instead of selling it on as a potential rent to rent unit, he knows that it works and he can give the buyer the numbers of the trading history of that unit, which is a really clever way of doing it, because then at that point, the security for the buyer as well as Shahid having made the money if setting the deal up. So he'll set it up, and if that unit sells this month or in 2 months' time, it doesn't really matter to him because he's got the bookings and he's making the ongoing cash flow from those units. So, I think the thing that I'd like you to take away from this, especially if you're brand new to securing rent to rent and you might have an issue with negotiating with landlords or finding the properties in the first place, is that the pinnacle, or the people that are performing incredibly well at this, aren't securing 1s and 2s and 3s. They're securing 40s and 50s and 60s. That's where you could be in 6 to 12 months' time, securing huge numbers of rent to rent properties and really building your business very, very fast. So the first thing that I want to establish is, what problems do you have with rent to rent? Where are you seeing that the issues are for you? Why are you on this webinar in the first place? I mean, you might be on this webinar because you're absolutely flying, and that's one of the answers to one of the questions I'm going to ask you in just a minute. But I want you to think about what your problem is, and how can we help you solve that problem? Is it that you don't have a process? Is it that you are aware that you need to be compliant and you have There are certain contracts that you should avoid and certain contracts that you should use, but you don't know what they are and you don't know why. Is that why you're here? Is it that you can't find deals? Is it that you don't know how to speak to agents and they have no interest in working with you? Or is it that you're not confident about finding tenants? All of these things could be holding you back. What you're going to learn here is the process. I'm going to tell you exactly what the process is for both HMO and serviced accommodation because they're ever so slightly different. We're going to go through the compliance. I'm going to explain what compliance you need and what contracts you need to have in place. I'm going to explain how you're going to find the deals. And I'm going to give you something that I don't think I've ever given away before to anybody outside of Sourced. And that is a formula for how to turbocharge finding the right deals. And that's for HMO and serviced accommodation. I'm going to talk to you about how you speak to agents, and we're going to look at how you find tenants and how you grow your occupancy, both for HMO. And I'm referring to guests in a serviced accommodation unit as tenants there. I know that's not quite the right terminology. They should be guests, but how to find tenants and how to find guests. So first of all, let's have a look at legislation and compliance, because this is a really important part of this. If you're planning on getting involved with rent to rent, either HMO or serviced accommodation, and you don't understand, if you haven't done your research to understand the legislation and the compliance, then you're trying to run before you can walk. It's really important that you understand the fundamental legislation that affects either HMO or serviced accommodation. We'll go through what you should be researching. I'm probably not going to cover all of these in the the infinite detail that you need, especially because these things can change from one area to the next. But these are the things that you should be aware of in your area to start this business. So Article 4. If you don't know what Article 4 is, then you need to research it. Article 4 is the removal of permitted development rights. If you change a normal family home into a HMO, then you will be changing the use class of that property from C3 to C4. If you're changing it into a HMO that's between 4 and 6 bedrooms. In order to do that, you need to have planning permission. Now, there is something in place called a permitted development that allows you to make that change from C3 to C4 without planning permission. But what local councils can do is they can remove that permitted development, and they do that by setting up Article 4 areas. Article 4 removes permitted development. So therefore, if you're looking at turning a normal family home into a normal 4, 5, or 6 bedroom HMO, you need to be very aware of whether permitted development is set up and whether that permitted development has been removed within Article 4 area. So that's one area of legislation that is absolutely your responsibility, because it's very unlikely that the owner of the property or even the estate agent in most cases will be aware of this. This is up to you, because you could end up in a situation where you've converted a property to a HMO, and then the planning officer comes around and says, "Hold on a minute, you've turned this into a HMO. We've seen your adverts on Spare Room. You're in an Article 4 area. You need to shut that down. You have not gone through full planning. You are in breach, and therefore you need to shut it down." So Article 4 is something you need to be aware of. Lease conditions. So if you're concentrating on serviced accommodation and you think that that's your route forward, you're probably going to start looking at places like inner city flats. That's where most people start for serviced accommodation. If you're in a block of flats, then that flat is probably a leasehold flat. And if it is a leasehold flat, the freeholder for that block will have a lease agreement with the landlord that owns that flat. And in that lease agreement, it will state what that landlord can and can't do with that flat. And it might be the case where short-term rentals, short-term lettings are not allowed. they might not be able to make any internal changes to the flat. They might not be able to do X, Y, Z, but short-term letting might be explicitly not allowed in that lease. Now, if that's the case, that flat and its current lease will stop you operating that flat as serviced accommodation. You will need to, if you're absolutely determined to get that flat on, the only way that you can do that is go and talk to the freeholder and see if they'll change the lease. That's all you can do. If they won't change it, then there's nothing you can do. You can't use that flat as serviced accommodation. So to give you an idea of where our franchisees are up to with that kind of thing, they'll have a record. Let's take Manchester as an example. Let's say there are 20 blocks of flats in Manchester. They will already have looked at those flats and got the lease contract for every one of those blocks of flats, and they'll understand whether serviced accommodation is allowable in that block or not. Then when a flat comes up for rent in that block, if it's a block that they can operate serviced accommodation for, then they'll pursue it. If they already know that the lease won't allow it, then they ignore it and they move on to the next one. When it comes to serviced accommodation as well, local authorities will put up restrictions. So, for example, you've got a serviced accommodation restriction in London, where in London itself, you can't operate a serviced accommodation unit for more than 90 nights. And that is a restriction. Now, it's not policed very well at the moment, but that is a restriction that has been put in place by all the councils of London. I have got a question, so I'm just going to have a look. So the question is, what impact will the new legislation make on rent to rent, such as planning permission will be needed? Yeah, so the planning permission that's going to be in place for serviced accommodation is very much like the planning permission for HMO. So will it make a difference? Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest difference it's going to make to rent serviced accommodation is the requirement that you can pre-qualify that you have planning permission if you've been running that unit as serviced accommodation, but each individual council chooses how long you need to have been running that unit for to pre-qualify. So, for example, in Edinburgh, you automatically qualified for planning permission if you could prove that you'd been running your serviced accommodation unit for 10 years. That's a long time. That's pretty much wiped out the serviced accommodation market in Edinburgh, which means that nobody's compliant, which means that if you do want to use the flat as serviced accommodation, you need to go through planning, and the local council has all of the control. So yeah, absolutely. Serviced accommodation is one of these property strategies that, for me, it's been like the pinnacle. It's been such a popular strategy over the last couple of years. Well, maybe 4 or 5 years. And I don't really understand. I don't really understand why. I would much rather get into HMO because it's established and there's a huge amount of demand at the moment. So yeah, there's a big upheaval. There's a big change happening in serviced accommodation at the minute. But the severity of that change depends on your local council. And again, going by this is the legislation compliance part, and you need to keep on top of that. Coming onto a webinar like this, we won't be able to go into the detail of what your local council are doing. Talking about the local council as well, let's look at licenses, because you might need to have a license to run that HMO or to run that serviced accommodation. And if you do, it's something that you need to take into consideration, because that license is going to cost you money. And you should put that into your due diligence to make sure that you're still making a profit, even though it's going to cost you another 700-800 quid to get a license once every 3 or 4 years. Being registered with the ombudsman or a redress scheme. So the two that we quote the most frequently are the TPO, the property ombudsman, or the PRS, the property redress scheme. You need to be registered with this if you're doing rent to rent, because you are in control of renting that property out to tenants or to guests. And so you need to make sure that you're registered. You're probably going to need a client account as well, especially if you're holding rental income or deposits. Deposit protection as well is part of the legislation if you're renting out to tenants, which you would be if you were managing the HMO units. You're going to be keeping people's data, so being registered with a data protection scheme, which is managed by the ICO, then you need to be registered with that too. You're going to need insurance. You're going to be taking people around houses. You're going to be giving people. You're going to be talking to landlords. You're going to be giving people advice as to what they should do with their property, and therefore you need to have at least PL and PI insurance. So that's public liability and professional indemnity insurance. You're probably going to need to set your business up in a limited company to keep it at arm's length from you and from making sure that you're not personally liable if anything goes wrong. And then AML, being registered for AML for anti-money laundering checks, and for KYC is know your customer. So when you're dealing with landlords, you're going to need to run through a process that includes both of those. Okay, so do you need a deposit holding account? This is another question that's just come in. Do you need a deposit holding account if you're doing rent to rent SA? Good question. No, you don't, because you're even though it's called rent to rent, technically when you're doing service accommodation, you're not renting the property out. It's not classed as rental income, so you're not bound by the same legislation that means that if you're renting it out as a HMO, that you need to register the deposits. So no, you wouldn't need that if you were doing service accommodation. Good question. So I want to ask you some questions now. Let me just get to the right part and go to my menu. Okay, so I'm just launching a poll on your screen at the minute. So I want to know where you'd like the most help. So you've got a number of different options that you can select here. So the question is, where would you most like help? And your options are in with the contracts, with checking your decisions, with finding your property, with convincing agents, convincing owners, or finding tenants. And you can select one of these options. But I'd be really interested because if based on your answers, I can tailor this presentation to make sure that I answer your questions. So let me know now, and I'll give you like 30 seconds or so to run through this. It's really helpful. I can see loads of answers coming in, so I'll just make sure that everybody's had an opportunity to make their selection. Okay. All right. 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, great. So a couple of people just squeaked in right at the last second there. So out of all the questions, out of all the possible answers that I've given you, finding the property is the most common answer that is being selected. So when we get to that bit, you know what, this is going to be really good for you then, because these not algorithms, these formulas that I'm going to give you to help you identify when a property works are really going to help you instead of looking at 1,000 properties that are in your area. By using these formulas, you're going to cut that 1,000 properties down to 20, 30, or 40 properties. It's going to make you so much more efficient. So in the legislation, we looked at contracts, or we talked about contracts and making sure that you're using the right contract for the right for your rent to rent business. Now, the most common contracts out there are ASTs, right? So if you go to an estate agent and you want to rent a property from an estate agent, they're probably going to use an AST, and that stands for assured short hold tenancy. And there are certain rules and regulations around an AST on what needs to be in that AST to make it an AST. But this isn't the right contract for you to use as a lease contract between you and the landlord. This is the right contract to use for the tenant. So the end tenant in a HMO, by all means use an AST contract. That is absolutely appropriate for that contract. However, for between you and the person that owns the property, it isn't the right contract because it's too restrictive based on those things that need to be included in an AST. It restricts and limits how that AST can be applied. So it's not the right contract for you. A management contract is absolutely the right contract if you want to set up a serviced accommodation unit. So the management contract between you and the owner of the property is the right contract to use if you're going to do it with if you're going to use that property for serviced accommodation. A management contract is okay. It makes all income subject to VAT, and actually that's a part of the legislation that we need to talk about. If you're using the property for serviced accommodation, then you are subject to VAT because all the income that you make isn't classed as rent. It's classed as income. And therefore, if you make income over the VAT threshold, then you'll have to register for VAT. That's something you need to take into consideration when you're setting up your serviced accommodation business. Because how are you going to mitigate for that? How are you going to structure your business in a way that means that you can make as much profit as possible while limiting the amount of VAT that you pay? And there's lots of creative ways that you can do that. Classing your income as management income and taking a percentage is one of those ways. So a management contract for serviced accommodation is a sensible way to go. You could use a commercial lease, especially if you're going to be renting the property or leasing the property from the owner for a long period of time. What you need to be aware of, though, is if you're taking a normal residential property that's just on the market, on the rental market with a local estate agent or letting agent, sorry, then if you try to put a commercial lease in place, mortgage companies don't like a commercial lease because they see that their property is a residential property. So why are you getting a commercial lease in place? So mortgage companies are not over the moon with a commercial lease being in place. Just got another question through. I'm just going to read that before I carry on. So thanks for the question, Henry. The question is, in London, as you said, does the maximum 90 days mean that you rent to the same person continuously for 90 days only? No, it means that in a 1 year period, you are not allowed to rent out your property for more than 90 nights on a short-term basis. So that's the limitation. Right, you've already seen, because I've clicked on, that the last one that is on this page is a rent guarantee agreement, which is based on a common law tenancy. And these are absolutely the right contracts to use if you're going to be renting the property out as a HMO. It's a rent guarantee agreement, so you're renting it from the owner. There's no limitation, so you can put whatever you want to in this agreement, unlike an AST. So it gives you full flexibility to include whatever you want to in the agreement, and we'll go into some of that negotiation stuff a little bit later on. But also, the rental income that is being made, or how it refers to any income, is with rent. So it explicitly makes sure that because everything is termed as rent, that you're not going to have to pay VAT should you be looked at, and should you be running the property as a HMO. Obviously, if you're running the property as serviced accommodation, you would still be subject to VAT. However, a common law tenancy agreement rebranded as a rent guarantee agreement, that is absolutely the right contract to use. So I promised you at the very beginning, I've just got another question in, so let me read that one. Will these slides be shared? Yes, absolutely. So just so you know, you're going to be getting an email probably tomorrow. We'll have some contact details on that email, and also you'll have a link to these slides, so you can have a look at the slides in your own time. So this is the process. I know it's just icons on a PowerPoint, but this describes the process really, really well. This is you, and this is where we start. And then you've got, whether you're HMO or whether you're serviced accommodation, you've got exactly the same process. And then what we do is we go down here first. So we've got finding the property online, we've got doing our due diligence, we've got speaking to the estate agent, and that's a really important point. You should go through the estate agent first. Whenever you're searching for a new rent-to-rent property, always go through an estate agent first, even if you're banging your head against a brick wall. And I've got an example of that, which I'll share with you in a little while. But if you can convince an estate agent or a letting agent that what you're doing is right, and that letting agent can come to you whenever they have another property that comes onto their books that works, then going through that letting agent is going to bring you 10, 15, 20 opportunities in the next few years. Whereas if you only spend your time going direct to vendor, direct to the landlord, then I think it's 53% of landlords in the UK only have one property. So the chances are that you're only going to be talking to that one landlord about that one property. And that means from an efficiency point of view, you've got to look for a new landlord every time you want a new property. Whereas if you go through a letting agent, all you have to do is go through that one letting agent and maintain that one relationship to keep on bringing you projects and new rent-to-rent deals over the next few years. So from an efficiency point of view, go to the letting agent first. If the letting agent says no, and this is my example, so I went to a letting agent, I said, I found a property that you're marketing and it's perfect for what I want to do. I explained what I do with the properties, and they said none of our landlords are going to be interested in that kind of thing. I was trying to get them to give me the property so I could use it as a HMO. I therefore went direct to vendor, and I convinced the vendor to go with me. So the vendor removed their property from that letting agent. So I called the letting agent again and said, look, I don't want to create a competition between us. Your landlord has gone with me. So how's about we work together and you bring me the next property that looks similar to this, and I'll rent it off you for 5 years. You don't have to do anything with the property. I'll manage it. You'll still be making your commission and we can work together. I've got the same answer. None of our landlords are going to be interested in that kind of thing. So I took another property off them because I went direct to vendor. But I still try to work with that letting agent because it is so much more efficient to work with that letting agent. She still won't work with me just because they're well established and they've got this presence in the area, and they think that working with me is beneath them. Nothing could be further from the truth. I've helped letting agents make a huge amount of money from rent to rent, and they could have been one of them, but unfortunately they just couldn't see it. If I find another property through them, will I go with them again? Absolutely, I will contact them. Estate agents are impossible to get a property from, even when you see it's been sitting there for ages. Okay, that's the situation that you're in. So the way that you should look at that, so I'm reading that out as a question. The way that you should look at that, in the way that I've always looked at that, is it's a challenge. It's a challenge, right? Because I've had those conversations with estate agents, and some estate agents won't, but you can't classify all estate agents the same, because some estate agents won't, or letting agents won't, but some letting agents will. So with those letting agents that will, make sure that you establish and maintain the relationships with them. I've got a really killer pitch that you can give to letting agents that I'm going to tell you about in a little while, that I can't guarantee it, but I bet you won't have heard before, unless you've heard it from me. So I'm gonna show you that in just a little while. How did you find the vendor? Well, we're going to get there. And the last question, how did you find the vendor? Yeah, we're going to get there. I mean, it's really simple. When you think about it, it's really simple. But this is the process, right? So we get to the letting agent, and then we go down here because we assume that the letting agent's going to agree to the deal. But if the letting agent doesn't agree to the deal, we then go up here and we follow this path, because that is by going direct to vendor. So let's start off. So what's the first thing that we do? The first thing that we do is research and find the deal. So how do you know that the area that you're operating in is the right area? Right, you've got to do your due diligence. And before you do your due diligence on the property itself, you've got to do your due diligence on the area to make sure that there's enough demand for that kind of thing. There's no point in going to all of this effort to make contact with an agent, and then the agent says no, and so you've got to go direct to vendor, and then you go direct to vendor, and then reluctantly, after a long period of time, they sort of hand the property over to you, and now you start to start to rent it out, and now you can't make any money from it because there's no demand. So how do you mitigate for that before you even start? So, you've got a huge amount of really useful information out there. You've got spare room for HMO, and you've got AirBNB for serviced accommodation. So for HMO, for spare room, you can go to that platform. You can see how many rooms are available in your area, and you can see how many people are looking for those rooms. So this is what I used to do every single time that I went to find a new property. I'd break it down into the different areas that I was interested in working in. So as you can see, I'm just south of Manchester. And then I would put how many people are looking, how many rooms are available, and therefore what's the ratio. And I wouldn't consider any area that had a ratio of fewer than 3. Because for every room that's available, I want at least 3 people to be looking. Because if there's 3 people looking for that kind of room, then I know that I'm going to be able to fill the room. But that's just the first stage of that analysis, because all that says is how many people are there and how many rooms are available. What it doesn't say is how much those rooms cost and what condition those rooms are in. And it also doesn't say what rent those people are willing to pay. So when I've established that I've got a ratio of 3 or higher, what I would then do is I'd then set up a dummy ad. Or I would follow an advert for a room that was very similar to the kind of rooms that I wanted to offer. And what I want to see is that advert disappears within 2 weeks. Because if it disappears within 2 weeks, the only reason that a landlord is going to take it off the platform is that the room has been taken. And I want my rooms, as soon as they're advertised, to go within 2 weeks. Because that means that when one tenant moves out, they have to give 4 weeks notice. If I advertise that room straight away, I know that I'm going to have a taker for as soon as that tenant moves out. So that's how you do it for HMO. For serviced accommodation, what you do is fairly straightforward. You look at the types of rooms, the types of accommodation that is available in that area, and then you look at the calendar for booking that room. And if there's loads and loads and loads of availability, there's obviously not that much demand. But if there's very little availability because that room's been booked up well in advance, then you know that the demand is there. And you can actually use platforms that take data from Airbnb, like AirDNA. AirDNA is a platform that takes all of its data from booking sources, and they compile it for you. So they can put on there how, if you are looking in Knutsford, let's say, they'll show you all the serviced accommodation rooms that are available in Knutsford. You can hover over them on a map, and it'll tell you how many days in the next year that unit is booked for. So you can get all of that information. It's out there available to you. But make sure you do it before you start looking for properties. It's the first thing that you should do to establish that you've got demand in that area. I've got a few questions here. I'm just going to go through. Do you recommend finding smaller estate agencies rather than your typical high street ones? No, not really, to be honest, because it all depends on the individual. It all depends on the person that is there and whether they're, open-minded or closed-minded. So it's not necessarily the brand of agency they're working under. One of the best relationships that I had with an estate agent was built up with Reeds Rains, who are a big corporate firm. So it's not necessarily. I think people use that as an excuse to only talk to a few estate agents, because let's face it, nobody likes banging their head against a brick wall. Nobody likes having a door shut in their face. But you're here to make money, and there's going to be an element of it being a challenge for you. So talk to every single letting and estate agent that you can. How much do one need to start rent to rent? Yeah, I'm going to get to that later on. How do you know how many people are looking? Because it tells you on Spare Room. On the top left of if you look in your area on Spare Room, on the top left there's a toggle, and one is rooms available and the other one is people looking. So it'll tell you, and it'll then list those people as to who's looking. In London, if you cannot do serviced accommodation for more than 90 days in a year, then SA is not really doable in London. Not if you want to be compliant currently, unless you're making a huge amount of money per night as well. So with that room analysis for both HMO and service accommodation, I said you need to find similar rooms to compare what is currently on the market with what you're going to do. So what should you be looking for? What should you take into consideration when you're looking for similar rooms? So rooms of a similar standard. So, you know, the decorative standard, the fit out, the furniture that's in the rooms, it needs to be similar to what you're going to be offering. Rooms in a similar location, obviously, like all comparables, the closer you can get to where you're going to be, the better. Similar offering, so price, for example. Ideally for HMO, you want something that's going to fill within 2 weeks. Houses with a similar number of occupants, because I've had people that have said they want to be in a HMO that's got no more than 4 people. But you know, HMO these days, we own one that's got 24 bedrooms. So you know, you can get all kinds of sizes of HMO. So it needs to be the same sort of size. And even the house, the rest of the house needs to be in a similar level of decor as well. And there's no perfect comparable, but you need to, with all of those categories that are on the screen right now, you need to get the closest that you possibly can to all of them in order to find the most reliable information for you to make your decision on. I've got one more question coming through. No problem, Henry. Right. Systemizing your sourcing for HMO. I created this. I've not seen this formula anywhere else. This is going to save you a huge amount of time when you're looking for HMO rooms. And I'm going to walk you through it right now. It's dead simple, but it's incredibly effective, because what this formula does, it tells you the maximum amount of rent you can pay to make a HMO work in a specific area. What that then does is, if you know the maximum amount of money that you can spend on the rental for the property, it means that anything that's over that price, you can discount. So there are 2 things that you're looking for from a rent-to-rent HMO perspective when you're searching for that property. 1 is that it financially works, and 2 is that it works from a layout point of view. So financially, obviously, it's got to make you money. Now, normally the way that it makes you money is that you can add an extra bedroom downstairs. And if you add that extra bedroom, that means you're making more rental income, and that means that you're making a margin. If it works from a financial point of view, it's then got to have the ability to add that extra bedroom downstairs. And if you can add that extra bedroom downstairs, then it works financially, it works from a layout point of view, it's worth going to the estate agent and seeing if you can agree a deal. And just like I showed you with the systemization, if you can't agree a deal with the estate agent, you then go direct to vendor. So let's say that you found a 4-bedroom property on Rightmove or Zoopla or just normal portals. That's all you have to do for HMO. So you find a 4-bedroom property. You're going to probably use this as a 5-bedroom property. So you multiply it by the highest room price. So 5 times 650 quid, 3,250 quid is the rental income that you can make from that property. Then you take off your income. So how do you know what your income is going to be? So what I would do to estimate my income would be take the highest room price and multiply it by 1.5, which gives me £975 per month. Now, the reason that I multiply it by 1.5 is I've done my due diligence. So I think I'm going to predict that I'm going to make 100, my occupancy is going to be 100%. So I'm going to be running at five occupants in this property pretty much most of the time. However, if one of those rooms is empty, I'm still making a profit. If one of those rooms is empty, the first place that money comes off is from my income. But even if I take off one room, I'm still in profit. So I'm still in the black. Now, because I've done my due diligence, I know that it's very, very, very unlikely that I'm going to have more than one room empty. So whether I've got one room empty or whether I'm full, I'm still making a profit. Ideally, obviously, I want to be full, so I'm making as much profit as possible. I'd then take off my bills. So for a 4-bedroom house that we're going to use as a 5-bedroom HMO, I'm going to estimate that the bills are going to be 600 quid per month, which means that what is left from that rental income is £1,675. And that is the maximum rent I can pay in that area for a 4-bedroom property that I'm going to turn into a 5-bedroom property and use as a HMO. So therefore, what you can do with that information is you can set up a specific search on Rightmove, and you can say, I'm looking for 4-bedroom properties for no more than £1,675. Now, what you can do is you can then go through this formula, because it's going to change based on the number of bedrooms that you create. So you can say, I found a 5-bedroom house that I'm going to turn into a 6-bedroom HMO. And how do those numbers change? And you'd set that up as a separate search on Rightmove. So now you're getting alerted. And obviously you would set up an alert on Rightmove as well, because it's got that functionality in it. Every time a 4-bedroom house comes onto the market for less than £1,675, you get an alert straight away. So you can get into the letting agent straight away as soon as it comes on the market. And the same for 5 bedrooms and the same for 6 bedrooms. So as soon as a property comes onto the letting market that financially works, you get alerted. What do you do with that alert? Well, you look at the images and you make sure that if you are predicting that you're going to be able to add another bedroom downstairs, that the layout of the house allows you to add another bedroom downstairs. And if it does, then that means from a financial point of view, that property works. And from a layout point of view, that property works. So that will work as a HMO. So now you just need to start the process of negotiating that deal. So the first place you go is the letting agent. And of course, if the letting agent says no, you then go direct to vendor. Just got a couple of questions from that, which is not surprising. So let me just answer them. How did you arrive at 925? I don't have 925 on the screen anywhere, so I'm not sure what you're referring to there. So just come back to me on that one. Oh, 975. There you go. You have come back to me already. Yeah. So like I said, it was the highest room price times 1.5. That's how I come up with 975. When you say add a bedroom, do you mean convert the living room if the layout allows? Well, yeah, for argument's sake, convert some space downstairs. It could be a dining room. It could be part of the living room. It could be the whole living room if you've got a big enough kitchen that you can turn it into a kitchen diner and lounge. But yes, that's right. Do you have to get HMO license yourself, or landlord has to apply if you have 5 rooms? Yeah, really good question. So if you've got 5 rooms, unlike the serviced accommodation license, if you're going to operate as a HMO, either you or the landlord can get the HMO license. Now, in the contracts that we use and that I give out to my franchisees, it states that that's the landlord's responsibility, but that you can take that responsibility away from them if you want to. As an SA, what experience can you offer to stand out? I mean, that's a very open question. We'll get to that in just a minute, because at the minute we're talking about HMO. But yeah, if I don't remember, just remind me, because I've got a slide that talks about that kind of thing. So what will happen to all serviced accommodation in London? Will it make any difference if you owned it? Well, serviced accommodation in London's had a 90-night restriction for the last 5 years, 6 years. So, let's just say that a lot of people don't really pay any attention to the 90-night restriction. Okay, that is how to systemize HMO, rent-to-rent HMO sourcing. Just go with Rightmove, go with Zoopla, set up these searches and only look at properties that you know work. That's the most effective way of doing so. Now, once you've been through that, let's just stick with HMO for a little while. Once you've been through that, you know that property works from a financial point of view. You've looked at the images, you know that the property works from a layout point of view. You've gone to the estate agent says that they don't want to work with you. Then what do? Well, you've already done your sourcing. So at that point, you just ignore the letting agent, and you go direct to vendor. You've already got the details of the property. It'll be very easy for you to find out the full address of that property, because the letting agent will probably have put it on there as the street and the town that it's in. So all you need is the number. So you can go somewhere like Google Street View, find the property on the road, find the number that's written on the door, and now you've got the full address of the property. At that point, you go to land registry, you put the full address of the property into the land registry, and it tells you who the owner of the property is. So now you've got the address of the property and you've got the owner's address. So you can start a series of letters that are, you can handwrite the envelope. So it's got their name and full address on a handwritten envelope. So you know that they're going to open it. And then you can put a pitch in that offer to them. So the way that I used to do it, I'm going to tell you about this in just a second, is I used to have a series of 4 letters that went out over 4 weeks. So as soon as the estate agent has said that they don't want to work with me, I'd then send the owner of the property a letter the next week, and the week after that, and the week after that, and the week after that, until, and after those, most people will get in touch with me during that 4-week period, because I've already found the property and I know that the property works. So just because the estate agent says that they don't want to work with me, I'm not going to start again and start looking for other properties. I know that that property works. So I'm going to do whatever I can to get in front of the person that owns the property and convince them that what I'm doing is the right thing to be doing. And there's huge benefits to them as to working with me. So that was HMO. So let's have a look at serviced accommodation, because there's also a systemized approach to serviced accommodation. So the formula for serviced accommodation is you take the nightly rate, you multiply by the average occupancy times 30 as an average for the days in the month, and that gives you your income. You take your income, you minus your profits, you minus your bills, and again, that gives you the rent that you can pay for the property. I'm not going to go through this one in too much detail because I'm conscious of the time. We've already been here for 50 minutes. That gives you the rent that you can pay. So again, you set up a systemized sourcing. So you look at the kind of units that you're interested in, and you've just gone through what the maximum amount of rent that you can pay is. So again, you set that up in Rightmove, and you go through exactly the same process. You go to the estate agent. If the estate agent says no, you go directly to the vendor. In this case, your profit is calculated as the nightly rate times 7. And that's the minimum profit you should be looking to take out of this property per month. Just got another question I'm going to have a look at. Please, can you quickly go through how to find out the ratio of tenants to rooms available on spareroom.com? Look, I'm not going to have time to do that. I'm really sorry. It's go onto Spare Room, go into your area. There's a section on the top left. There's literally a blue button, and you swap between tenants and rooms, and it gives you that information straight away. It's just top left of the search area. Now we need to work out if the deal works, right? So we need to go through our due diligence in a lot of detail. Now, for this, you just need a spreadsheet. What we've done is we've actually got a deal calculator that we've put online for all of our franchisees. I've got an example here of a property deal that works, but this isn't a rent-to-rent deal. But what our spreadsheet does, what our online deal calculator does, is it takes all the information and it compiles it, and it gives us a really simple, straightforward, does this deal work or not, sort of results section, which is what you can see here. Based on that, you can then decide to make a decision as to whether you want to go ahead or not. For a rent-to-rent deal, it's very straightforward to set up this kind of spreadsheet for yourself, because your variables are relatively few. So you have how much rental income are you going to make, and then you need to take off the costs. So your costs are, gas and electric, water, the council tax, and boiler insurance, normal tenants insurance, all of those sort of regular monthly costs. Take off that, and then make sure you take the amount of money that you want to make off from it as well, and what you're left with needs to be able to cover the rent. Just got another question, so I'm going to answer that. Let me just have a look. Okay, no problem. So yeah, it's really easy to set that up. In fact, what I might do is I've got a really simple rent-to-rent HMO calculator. I'll include that tomorrow on the email that gets sent to you. So keep an eye out for that. So now we're going to speak to the agents. A lot of people, especially when it comes to rent-to-rent, are scared of speaking to estate agents, but you've got some incredible benefits that you can offer to the estate agents. Now, first of all, when you introduce yourself to an estate agent. I made this mistake time and time again. Do not try to explain rent to rent on the phone, because it won't work. The best way to explain what you're doing is to just book a viewing with the agent. So as soon as you've set up your systemized sourcing and you've got something comes across your desk, you get one of those notifications. You call the agent and say, you know, is that property still available? I'd really like a viewing, please. They set you up on a viewing, and you get to the viewing and you talk about the property, you talk about the estate agent, you build rapport with the estate agent. And in the last 5 minutes of that viewing, you then explain what you do. But you make sure that you don't use the buzzwords that are going to turn them off. Don't say HMO, don't say serviced accommodation. You know, the way that I used to word it was that I would say to them, well, I work with local companies and I find accommodation for their staff. That's my profession. That is what I do. Now that is still quite a broad thing to say. I would go on, if I was selling it for a HMO, I'd say, now the people that are moving into the area for the local businesses, you know, they tend to be on the bottom rung of the ladder, like the first step of the career ladder. So they can't afford to rent houses like this on their own. So they pull together and they rent them. They rent a single bedroom at a time. Or if I was doing service accommodation, I'd say the local businesses around here, you know, they need accommodation for their staff, but they have short-term contracts. So they tend to have shorter-term rentals. And that's how I would get into the estate agent. And then, you know, that pitch would then go to the owner of the property. And then I would elaborate on that with them to say, yeah, you know, I'm renting out one bedroom at a time. However, when I'm doing this, I'm always constantly going on about the benefits, both to the estate agent and to the landlord. So I'm going to offer you full rent guaranteed for the next 5 years. I'm also going to make a monthly financial contribution to the maintenance of the property. So I used to do this with all of my units. The first £200 worth of any damage that happened or any repairs that were needed, I'd cover every single month. Now, per unit, that used to open me up to about £4,800 per year that I would need to pay if I was spending a full £200 per month. But actually, per unit, the maximum that I paid in a full calendar year was 200 quid. But that gives the owner of the property real trust in me, because I'm putting my money where my mouth is, that I'm going to look after their property. So not only am I paying their rent in full for 5 years, and therefore they're getting no void periods, but I'm also going to look after their property to the tune of me paying 200 quid a month if I need to, every single month. Depending on how you negotiate it, and this is completely up in the air, you can contribute towards the refurbishment. So in most of the properties that I took over, I would do some level of refurbishment. You know, I'd repair a wall, I'd put in a new shower, I'd do something so that the owner could see, you know, I'm not just saying that I'm going to make their properties better. I am actually making their properties better. But from your point of view, you're making their property better so you can also achieve the highest rent possible. Because if you've got a really crappy looking wall, then tenants are not going to pay as much to live in that property. It's just common sense. We've got a couple of questions. So let me just go here. Is it a good idea to buy rent-to-rent deals from other franchisees who are selling on the sourced app? I don't see why you would. I think, you know, you as a franchisee have got such great access. You've got our full course, our rent-to-rent course. Just watch the rent-to-rent course and save yourself a few £1,000s. So if I was in your position, Gulbahar, I would do exactly that. Can we complete the serviced accommodation rental equation and how you would find the vendor? So the same way, I'd find the vendor in the same way. Exactly how I explained it for HMO. You'd find them online on Rightmove, and then you go through the estate agent. And if you can't go through the estate agent, you go to the vendor by going through the land registry. We're already an hour in, and this is supposed to last an hour, so I'm not going to be able to go through everything in a huge amount of detail. Now, this is the part that I said at the beginning. I haven't seen anybody else talk about this ever. So if you go to an estate agent and the estate agent doesn't want to work with you, and they say, you know, like, why would I work with Why would I work with a rent to renter? You know, we manage the properties ourselves. Thanks very much. This is your comeback. On average, at letting agents, one letting agent looks after 100 properties. Right. So let's say that they make £100 per month per property. So that one letting agent managing those 100 properties turns over 10 grand a month. Now, if that agent gives you 10 properties, you're going to be managing those properties. The letting agent doesn't need to manage those properties. You're going to be in there every single week because you'll probably have a cleaning service that goes in there every single week. That cleaning service can take pictures. They can basically do property checks every single week, and you can forward that to the letting agent to help them stay compliant. Now that one person in the letting agency, because they've outsourced 10 properties to you, that one person is now managing 110 properties, but it doesn't add to their workload in any way. They're managing 110 properties. Now, those 110 properties, assuming that they make £100 per month per property, that one person is now turning over £11,000. So you have increased the turnover without increasing the costs of that letting agency. You have made that letting agency more efficient and therefore more profitable. Nobody talks about that. So now we've gone through the letting agent. We're trying to negotiate a deal with the letting agent. Now, remember, you need to use the right contract. The letting agent will probably say, I've got an AST contract. You're going to have that conversation with them and say, unfortunately, the AST is not an appropriate contract between me and the landlord. It needs to be this contract. Don't forget that everything in this is a negotiation and open for negotiation until the contract is signed. Every single property that I brought on, I asked for a 1 month free to get set up. And every single time I got it. The rental amount is obviously under negotiation because you don't have to pay what it's advertised for. Who contributes towards the refurbishment of the property? It is still the landlord's property. So if you go 50-50, that's perfectly reasonable, right? Because landlords have to refurbish their properties regularly anyway. The maintenance contribution. So am I going to contribute £200, £100, £150? The term of the contract, I would ideally go for 5 years because I want to secure that I'm going to be making money from that property for a long period of time. Who pays the bills? The gas and electricity certificates, whose responsibility is that? Ultimately, it is the landlord's responsibility, but you can pay for that if it helps you get the deal over the line. You need to help them with the mortgage restrictions because they probably have the property on a normal buy-to-let mortgage, but you're going to be using it as either HMO or serviced accommodation. Now, their standard mortgage probably doesn't allow it to be used for that. So therefore, the landlord is going to need to call the mortgage company and say that there's going to be a change, that they're going to be using it as HMO or serviced accommodation. It's worth your while sitting by the landlord when this happens, because what has normally happened in my experience is that the landlord calls the mortgage company. The landlord says, I want to use this as a HMO. And the mortgage company says, oh, you can't do that under this mortgage. And that's where the conversation ends. Realistically, and the reason that you're there is because you're solutions orientated. So you would say to the landlord at that point, okay, you can't use this mortgage for a HMO, but do they have another mortgage product that you can port over to? So they're just got to change their mortgage with the same provider. And at that point, they are being compliant and they can use their mortgage. In the contract that we use, though, it explicitly says that it's the landlord's responsibility to sort that out. And that's reasonable, right? Because you can't call a mortgage company and start moving people's products around. The landlord has to do that for themselves. And then the furniture. Have they got furniture in there? Do you need to lease furniture? Who's going to pay for that? Again, it's all part of the negotiation. I've got a question from Mush. Hello, Mush. Who puts in the fire doors and other things in the HMO to make it compliant, us or the landlord? That is down to your negotiation skills, Mush. And having known you for about 5 years now, I reckon you silver-tongued devil, you'll be able to negotiate that. But realistically, I used to do it for my properties. And what I would do is I'd take their doors out and I'd put them in the garage. I would always seal the garage so that the tenants couldn't use the garage. That was my storage area, the garage. But I'd take their original doors out, I'd put them in the garage, I'd put in fire doors with the right locks and everything for the HMO license. And then I kept the old doors so that if I had to give the property back after 5 years, I could just put the old doors back in and leave it in exactly the state that I found it. But yeah, that would definitely be part of your setup cost. That's a good question, Mush. So now onto the contract. We talked about using the right contract. We talked about that earlier. Finding tenants and guests. Right, this is where you make the difference, because a lot of people that do rent to rent are people that are new to property, and they think that, you know, putting your property onto Spare Room or putting your property onto Airbnb is all it takes. Nothing could be further from the truth. The most efficient, the most productive, the most profitable people that we have in our network are the people that constantly ask themselves the question, what else can I do? All right, I put it on Spare Room. Now what else can I do? How else can I drive occupancy? Or I've put it on Airbnb. Now what else can I do? How else can I drive occupancy? This is one way. This was one of my HMOs. I really like this picture because it doesn't actually tell you anything about the room, but it's a really nice picture. I used to get professional photographers in every single time that I put a new HMO on my portfolio. This is a picture that I found on Spare Room. Which room would you rather live in? Now, this picture here actually tells you more information about the room. You can see it's quite a big room. You can see it's a double bed. You can see it's got a window. You can't tell any of that from this picture, but you'd much rather stay in that room, wouldn't you, rather than that room? Because in that one, I've taken a professional picture and I've dressed the room. The other things that you can do are, let's look at Spare Room, for example. When you go into Spare Room, you get the option to renew your advert. Now, if you renew your advert in Spare Room, what that does is it puts it to the top of the number one in the ranking. You can renew your advert roughly once every hour. So I would set myself reminders on my phone to renew my advert as often as possible, so that my advert was as close to the top as it could be to get the most views every single day. But realistically, that's only going to have a small effect on your overall occupancy. What you should be looking for is other sources of occupancy other than just Spare Room, so that you're not reliant on just one portal. And the best places to go are local business. So I used to look at head offices and training hubs in my area. And this is relevant for serviced accommodation or HMO. What I would do is I'd go onto LinkedIn. I'd type in HR and then I'd type the area that I was looking in. And I would contact as many people that worked in HR departments for businesses as I could. I had a standard message that I used to send them. And it was basically that I own a lot of accommodation in the area. I work with local businesses and I help provide accommodation for their staff. I'm an expert at doing this kind of thing. So if you want to get in touch with me, I can maybe help out your business. And of course, that's not going to be relevant for most of the people that it goes to, because they don't have new people coming into their business, but some will. So I used to send this message to as many people as I possibly could once a month on LinkedIn. And then I'd have some people that would come back to me. I got to the position that with some very, very big companies in my local area, I was actually part of their onboarding process. So when the person had signed their contract and they were given their start date and where they needed to be on and all of that kind of stuff, I was actually copied into that email, and the HR department introduced me to their new starter and said, if you are looking for accommodation, this is a local business. They can help you out with, you know, bus routes and train routes and accommodation, and where you can, you know, where's a reasonable place to live. And at that point, they are my lead, and I will try and convert them into one of my properties. Now, if you've got Spare Room working for you and you've got local businesses that are referring people that are going to move into the area to you, then your occupancy should be absolutely flying. The one other thing that you can do for serviced accommodation, which makes it different from HMO, is in serviced accommodation, who are your competitors? Well, your competitors are hotels, right? So what you can do is you can go to local hotels at maybe 11:30 at night when all the guests are back in their rooms. Go to the local hotels, walk around the car park, and take a note of all the vans, the names of the vans that are in the car park. Because if you see 2 or 3 vans that are from the same company, they're probably paying quite a lot of money for their staff to stay in that hotel overnight. And if you've got a serviced accommodation unit that's got maybe 2 or 3 bedrooms, well, instead of paying for 3 bedrooms in the hotel, they could pay for your serviced accommodation unit. And your serviced accommodation unit is probably cheaper than 3 rooms in the hotel. So the next day you can call up that company and say, I see that you've got people staying at this hotel. Have you considered renting out a flat instead? Because I've got a flat in the local area and it's cheaper than that hotel is. And then you can have that conversation again with their HR team. But at every point, it's about thinking about what more you can do other than just putting it on Spare Room or just putting it on Airbnb. And then you make money at the end. So let's assume that letting agent has said no, so you don't do the deal straight away and you start a direct-to-vendor negotiation. So we're now going to go along this timeline. And actually, most of the timeline is very, very similar. But like I said, I set up 4 letters to go out to that property owner over the next 4 weeks. So the first one is just a high-level introduction. The second letter is like wow, I can't believe you haven't contacted me. I have got the best rental offer in the area, bar none. You cannot get a better deal from anyone on the high street. Because at this point, I don't care if I'm the letting agent isn't any part of this negotiation anymore. So I can say things like, I don't charge any commission to manage your property. It doesn't matter to me that might piss off a letting agent because the letting agent isn't part of this picture. They've already told me that they don't want to work with me. So letter 2 is slightly incredulous. Letter 3 is, I'm going to position myself away from the high street. I am better than the high street. I am actually managing your property. I will come to you when problems have been solved, not when you have problems. This is a different style of management. And then letter number 4 is, look, you're about to miss out. You're about to lose the best offer that you've ever had for this property. And then, like I say, most people would contact me at some point. How long is left, Saqib? I don't know. I've got no idea. I was hoping that this would last about an hour because that's what it's planned for. But we're currently about 15 minutes over. What software are you going to use? Well, you're going to use Spare Room. You're going to use Airbnb. We've talked about them. You're also going to need a tenant management system. And this is if you're managing it yourself. You're going to need a platform manager for serviced accommodation. You're going to need bookkeeping software. You might need tradesperson management. And if you're going to use a VA, the best software that I had to manage my VA was YouTube, because every process that I asked my virtual assistant to do, I would put it first. I'd record a video and I'd put it on YouTube, and I would have all of her processes on YouTube so that she could refer back to those videos at any point. And she used to manage all of this process for me, all the process of finding the deal in the first place with those formulas that I've given you. Effectively, what income can you make? You're looking at, for both, you're looking at about £1,000 a month. That should be, a decent amount of money that you can make from either one of these strategies. You set up, you're looking at £5,000 or above, depending on how well you negotiate with that property owner. So then if you're making £1,000, how many of these is it going to take for you to replace your income? For me, it was £6,000. It was £6,000 and I got there in 6 properties. I was making about £6,500, but I needed £6,000 and I got there in 6 properties. Those 6 properties, by using the methods that I've just shown you, I secured in 6 months. So for you in 6 months' time, your financial position could be completely different based on what you can achieve using that formula. Oops. In fact, that was a poll, but I'm just going to go on because we're already running over. Here at Sourced, we have a very structured way of teaching people how they can make money out. And it's kind of similar to what I've just shown you. Number one, we do research. We find out everything that we need to about the strategy, so we can make our way forward. We then go and find the properties. We find the properties when we are informed and knowledgeable. When we found the properties, we have a way of securing the property. So in this example, it would be using those contracts, because using the contract secures that property to you. Then we structure the deal. Then we look at the works, and then we look at the exit. We have a very set way. And Gulbahar, I know you're still on this call. If you go to the Rent to Rent course, this is how it's structured. And we go into a lot more detail about every single step, because obviously the normal Rent to Rent course that we give for our franchisees is 2 days long, not just an hour. Jonathan, they will be sent to you tomorrow. Yes, of course. So to start out, doing this kind of property stuff on your own, starting out your own property investment firm, how much is it going to cost to do your marketing, to do your startup training, to cover your salary, to give you investment capital? You could easily need to have £50,000 in your pocket. What you then need to spend on an ongoing monthly basis, you need to give yourself property leads, you need to find investor leads, you need computer systems. If you had a mentor, to pay for your marketing, to pay for monthly training events. To keep your business ticking over, you're looking at about £5,000 per month that you need to keep reinvesting into yourself. If you need training, if you need support, you can get them from a trainer. That's one place that you go for training and support. If you need unlimited support, you're probably going to need to employ a mentor. If you want investor leads, you need to go to a lead generation company. Same with property leads. You need to go to a lead generation company. That's going to cost you about 50 quid a lead. A mentor is going to cost you about 500 quid per month. And a trainer, it can easily cost you £25,000 per year for training and for support. If you go to an agent, it's going to cost you about 1%. We've actually got a property app to help our franchisees sell deals. If you need funding, you've got to go to a lender. The lender isn't going to lend you all of the money that you need to do the project. You're probably going to have to find a decent amount of deposit yourself. If you're looking at joint ventures, you could go to a joint venture partner, but they're going to extract as much money as they possibly can from their deal by doing as little as possible. Here at Sourced, we provide all of these things. And yes, we do that for people that are focusing on rent to rent, but that's just the cash flow part. We have this incredible system that is built up to help people establish their cash flow from things like deal sourcing or from things like rent to rent. But then what? Well, with us, you then move on to the next strategy, and that's all included in our package. The next strategy can be flips or refurbs or commercial conversions. And then you move on to the portfolio side when you're really building your property wealth. And again, that's all included in our package. We don't try and charge a new setup fee for any of those things as you get richer and richer and richer, and you progress through doing property deals. Now, for us, the cost to have access to all of those things is £10,000 plus VAT, and that gets you a seat at the table for 5 years. It's then £315 plus VAT per month. That's it, and that gets you access to everything. Now, if you're interested in joining us, if you've been looking at us for a while, the next induction is on July the 25th and the 26th. Now, actually, that induction has just filled up, so we don't have any more space left on that induction. So if you are interested, the next time that you could join us is on September the 26th and 27th, so a few months away now. But if you are interested and you're really serious about making some advancements into property, then you need to get in touch with us as soon as you can to make sure that you don't miss out on the next induction that's available, which is September, which means that you're going to be waiting until November or even possibly 2025. So that's the end of the presentation. Thanks very much for staying with me. I'm sorry we overran a little bit. If you've got any questions whatsoever, there's the email address at the bottom of the screen, sam.clayton@source.co. Get in touch with us, and we'll see whether we can work together, because it's not just about making sure that you get what you want. To become part of our network, you need to we need to do some due diligence on you to make sure that you're the right fit for us, as well as us being the right fit for you. So before I head off, I'm going to answer some questions. So I will stay around here for the next couple of minutes if you want to ask me any of those questions that you can. I've answered 37 already, but if you've got any other questions, by all means, put them in the Q&A box and I will help you out. You're welcome, Sakib. It didn't actually last that much longer, did it, Sakib? So that's a bonus for everyone. Why did you not recommend taking a rent-to-rent service accommodation ready-made deal from one of your existing franchisees? That is a terrific question, Rob. So the person that asked me that question before is also a franchisee. So the answer to them was them as a franchisee has got access to our rent-to-rent course. They've already joined us, so there's no additional fee to access that rent-to-rent course. So my argument is, if you're an existing franchisee of Sourced, just do the rent-to-rent course and work and learn how you can find those deals yourself. Now, if you're outside of Sourced and you don't know how to find a rent-to-rent deal yourself, and you don't have the time, or you're not interested in learning on how to do it, then yet maybe buying a deal from one of our existing franchisees is exactly the right way to go. But previously, when I answered that question, it was to a franchisee. So I hope that makes a bit more sense now. Mavis, where can I find the rent-to-rent course? So if you're a franchisee of ours, then it's on the online training software. If you're not a franchisee of ours, then you would have to join us first before you got access to that course. Mr. or Mrs. James, I cannot see whether you're male or female. Thank you for the presentation. You're more than welcome. I hope it's helped. This has been great. What are the top 3 pitfalls you witness in the rent-to-rent serviced accommodation business? A lack of understanding of what's going to happen in the next couple of years, Tanya. A lack of understanding as to the legislation that the government wants to put in place. And look, a Labour government's just got into England, and they're not averse to more regulation than the Tories have been. So, I think that serviced accommodation is only going to get tougher and tougher and tougher. But that is the biggest one, I would say. How much is it to be a franchisee? So it's £10,000 plus VAT plus £315 per month. How do you set up social housing government backed? That is a whole other webinar, Gulbahar. I'm not going to address that right now because it's not the core of this webinar. Talk to other franchisees. You were on a Zoom call with all of us last night, right? You were on a Zoom call with Donna, and Donna is another franchisee who has set exactly that up. That is her business. So you can either talk to your support person or go into Workplace and find out from Donna how she's done it. Do you pay the £10,000 at once? You need to pay the £10,000 before you start. So you don't have to pay it all in one go, but you do need to pay it before you come onto the induction. Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Gulbahar. You'll get that tomorrow, JG. I'm sorry, I can't see that. I can just see your initials. Can you show the SA rental equation with figures? I don't have the time to do that. I've already run over. But you'll get the equation tomorrow when you get the slides. Thank you, Sakib. Thanks for the message. Thank you, Mavis. Okay, I'll stay on for just another minute. If anyone's got any questions. Cheers. You're welcome. Okay, no other questions coming through. So thank you very much for your time, guys. Really appreciate it. And look, really, genuinely, I hope it's helped. Good luck with everything that you do. And maybe we can work together in the future. Let's see. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.